digitaljamsessions.com.
Hello and welcome to this Digital Jam session. Today we are joined once again by Oscar Clark from Unity. Welcome back, Oscar. We also have with us Jorg from, well, I think that you're not from a specific company. I'm just going to say writer, producer, director.
Oifi is my company.
Oifi, there you go. There is a specific company in there. And we also have Derek from Duality. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to ask you to explain a little bit more about what each of you do, because I know for a fact, Oscar, that me saying that you're from Unity is a bit of a misleading kind of intro, because you do so many other things. Why don't you tell us all about everything else that you're up to?
Yeah, well, obviously I am from Unity. I'm an evangelist worker for the Helsinki team and do all sorts of stuff for them, travel around the world, talk about game development. I'm also working on a game called The Rocky Horror Show Touch Me, a rhythm action dance game using swipes. And I also do a whole bunch of things like advising companies. There's an AR project I'm advising on and a VR project I'm advising on as well. So I have loads of things going on.
You just like your fingers in mini pies, don't you, sir?
I get bored easily.
Okay, and Jorg, why don't you tell us a little bit more about what you've been up to in your recent exploits that went to the theatre in January, I believe?
Yes, there's a film called The White King, which is a sci-fi drama based on an amazing novel, and it stars Jonathan Pryce and Agnes Dean and Fiona Shaw and Greta Scacchi and also some other lovely people. And it's a film that's been touring the world's festivals and is coming to the US very soon, which I'm very excited about. And so that was our first feature film that I've actually co-wrote and co-directed with my wife and creative partner Alex, who I founded our company Oifi with, and we produce and write and create content for all sorts of different devices. We tell stories across many devices and mediums and work in games as well. And now I'm directing my first VR game, which I'm doing with Imre, whom you've had on the show several times beforehand, of Bossa Studios, who've created, for instance, Surgeon Simulator, the Jeremy Hunt NHS simulation. And also with Just Add Water, who are up in Leeds, and they've worked on the Oddworld franchise and also most recently released the Volume Coda, the PSVR launch title with Mike Bithell. And I believe they're currently working on Micro Machines with Codemasters as well.
Indeed, I haven't heard that name for a while, Codemasters. But Derek, why don't you tell us more about what you're up to with Duality and why the French spelling or the odd spelling of the name?
Well, I've always had a bit of an affinity with the lovely Latin language, so that's why it's du as in French for two and Latin for two as well. It's just myself and an Italian coder. And the company, when we first started, so the company has expanded since then, but we started off doing mobile phone games, tablet-based games, and in recent years we've been moving more and more into virtual reality. We got interested in virtual reality to start with because of the buzzwords around it and, the exciting new potentials behind it. But in the last year and a half, we've been getting pulled more and more towards augmented reality and experiences. So our games have started off as essentially one of the best reviews we ever received was that your games make me hate my thumbs. So that might tell you a little bit about the sort of games that we make. But then our augmented reality experiences, we just feel that they're just kind of, they're really moving people forward in a way that they haven't even considered possible before. So that's why we're in virtual reality and augmented reality.
Okay. Well, what I wanted to do was kind of continue the conversation that Oscar and I started at the virtual reality show. That was the last show that we both did together, where we were talking about people's perceptions of virtual reality, because I know that this is one of those ones that it's becoming a little bit of a thing that we all have to talk about in our industry, which is this idea that we are evolving the way that we describe what VR is, and those terminologies are beginning to, settle a little bit in terms of the way that we refer to things and what we mean by certain things. And I suppose expectations are starting to bed down a little bit, so it's less about the big, showy, tentpole-y things and more about just let's get down to business and let's actually show people what this thing can do and how they can make money out of this thing. I am curious, Oscar, for you to lay forth your original outline of your stance on this, so that we can kind of dig a little bit deeper into it.
Yeah, so I'm not sure I can remember the original one. That was a while ago, but I mean the way it currently forms in my head is like PR's got this sort of double-edged sword going on for actually not just VR but also AR. Is that we have these very high-level expectations about what the possibility will be. There's the Minority Report like experiences that people are expecting. I don't think we can go by the Lawnmower Man, but that's another subject. But we've had these sort of science fiction tropes about how the universe around us will be completely transformed by these technologies. And yet the reality is we're going to put on a pair of ski goggles which have got a mobile phone in them, or some other technology that's wired up to some massive computer, and we get a good experience. In fact, we get an experience which is, once you do it, is incredibly immersive and perception changing. But to get the number of people so that you can take this industry seriously, people are looking at mobile phone numbers, not looking at, say, Steam numbers of people. So I think we've got to sort of double-edged sword to get mass market people understanding what we can be. In some ways, we have to sort of rein back their expectations. But to get the hardcore gaming audience excited, we have to show them, actually, this is real. This is able to do those amazing, glorious things that we promised. So we have two problems to deal with.
But I think that there's something more fundamental to it, which is this idea that actually that there is still this kind of, I'm going to say it's a bit of a misunderstanding in some people's minds, which is that we're going to have this kind of insta-future where it's going to be, haptic bodysuits and VR goggles, and everybody's going to be, spending all their time in them. It's like literally people think that the Oasis from, Ready Player One is going to be our future. And the reality, no pun intended, of the scenario is much more likely that, first of all, it will not be a VR solution that we end up with. It's going to be a mixed reality solution at best, if not something else entirely different. But also the fact that it's not something we're going to use it all the time. We're not going to want to be in it all the time.
But then there's the other aspect, which is it's the Cylons thing in the prequel to Battlestar Galactica from school. And, this whole idea that we're going to be lost and all this sort of hysteria that goes with the idea of not being able to trust our senses and addiction and, the people misunderstand the difference between when we talk about a game being addictive and being exciting, whereas opposed to when we talk about a situation and the nature of behavioral addiction. People are so confused by the language we use, and they're so confused by the journey we're on that, I think in some ways we're kind of like victims of our own success.
Okay. So I'm curious then, from your perspective, York, where you think, what we need to do in order to bring everybody else on that journey with us. Because I think Oscar's right to a certain extent, in as much as a games industry, we're kind of a little bit, ostrich-like in as much as this is our bubble, we're in our bubble, we're quite happy to be in our bubble, and we don't really need everybody else in that bubble with us. But in order to actually push the industry forward, we do kind of need everybody to be on the same page, and we do kind of need everybody to have at least a general understanding of where we're coming from and what some of our terminologies mean, because I think people do get a little bit defensive or a little bit cautious when they hear things like addictability or, stickiness or playability, or even the phrase, whales, for example, which I know that some people outside of our industry hate that phrase.
No, don't use that word.
But it's kind of like, from a commercial standpoint, that's what we need to be thinking. That's how we think. It's how we operate in order to make successful game titles. So I'm curious, York, from your perspective, what you think we need to do to articulate beyond our own industry.
Well, I agree. I think one thing is we are currently living in a society that's very, very divisive and very divided and almost binary, and I think a lot of us will probably be able to trace that back to how we have been behaving on social media and how we've actually already been separated from the real world and very cleverly organized into Brexit or Remainers or Trump versus the other guys or white and black and everything else. So I think, already the digital world and what Silicon Valley has put us into is already a bit of an issue. So I understand how the idea of then putting on a mask on your head and looking like the xenomorph in Alien and being completely separated from reality and on your own family is a problem. I personally, for instance, I won't put a VR headset on around my kids. And at the same time, when you have small kids in your house, the idea of being completely shut off from the outside world, not be able to hear your kids when they're perhaps having a nightmare or waking up or etc. Or perhaps your kitchen is on fire and you don't realize it. I understand how VR is still quite a daunting and an alienating experience. But as you said, Tanya, mixed realities and augmented reality is where it's headed. And at the same time, I don't remember, when I first played Pong as a small kid, I didn't look at it going like, well, that looks a bit squarish and crap. I just went like, wow, I'm currently controlling this incredible ball, and I'm using my imagination to. And now we don't even have to use our imagination. I mean, I had friends over a couple of weeks ago, and they're both chefs. They run this amazing fish restaurant, and they came over, and one of them is this hardcore gamer. I mean, he plays everything, and he spends like, days and days inside, inside Fallout or whatever, and the other guy doesn't play games at all. And they both, and the hardcore gamer went, well, I don't know. I mean, I already know that I'm not really going to go for this generation of VR. It's still early. The resolution will be quite low, and there's only so much you can do, blah, blah, blah. And so he sat down, and he had his mind blown by it completely. I gave him a PSVR demo, and because he's the hardcore gamer who's bragging about how cool he is and how he knows everything, I put him straight into Resident Evil.
I love it.
And he loved it. I mean, he pre-ordered the PlayStation that night, and now his girlfriend is threatening to leave him. And the other guy, he doesn't like games necessarily. He doesn't like devices. He put it on, and his reaction was fascinating to me. He puts on the helmet. He's doing. I'm giving him the underwater sort of demo inside PlayStation Worlds, and with the shark attack, etc. And when he's done with it, I asked him, so like, what did you think? He's like, yeah, it was pretty cool. I felt like I was in a completely different place. Yeah, it's pretty cool. I'm like, pretty cool? You just said you felt exactly like you were in a different place. And you think it's pretty cool, not amazing or magical or whatever. And it's like, yeah, and I guess we are a bit jaded these days. I think we just feel that technology is evolving so quickly. When is the right entry point? We feel like, it's going to be better 2 years from now. It's going to be better 5 years from now. But so it is an early adopters game, and maybe that's okay. Maybe we just need to create really beautiful experiences for the early evangelists. And with 900,000 PlayStation VRs out there, that's a pretty sizable audience already, for instance, for high quality narrative and also gameplay experiences.
But you know what? I'm going to jot down on what you just said, because I actually think that it's down to laziness. That's what I think this is down to. And I say this on the basis of, I remember days when, and yes, I'm showing my age, get over it. But I remember the days when people played MUDs, multi-user domains, good old-fashioned text gaming. And, one step up from proper role-playing and pencil and paper stuff that Oscar would do. And, you used to use your imagination to fill in the blanks. You used to paint the picture for yourself in your mind, and you used to connect the dots. And as we've evolved as a games industry, we've created these beautiful visual landscapes and we've shown people exactly what something looks like. And it's got to that stage where actually players and consumers are so much lazier now, because everything is literally just presented to them. And it has almost got to that stage. I know that I've spoken to a couple of studios in the past where we've been talking about, what the game design needs to be like. And you get to that stage where it's like, look, we just need to design for the stupidest possible denominator. Just because it's a door, we also have to put the thing that says go through the door, because people are so lazy. They've got to that stage where it's like, if it's not literally handed to them on a plate, they're kind of like, well, why wouldn't you do that for me? Why wouldn't you just open the door for me? And it's like, I remember a time when you used to actually really have to work for this stuff. And in some ways, I do think that there is a certain expectation, especially from mainstream consumers who are so used to TV being in these small little bite size, because we don't have enough attention span, and everything just kind of being handed to them on a little bit of a platter, that I wonder if perhaps we're in danger of the backlash from that, where it's got to be so perfect, it's got to be so good that otherwise they are just totally unimpressed by it.
Well, but there's a difference between perfection and on the nose sort of spelling everything out as well. I mean, like Res Infinite, for instance, on PlayStation is a beautiful synesthetic, extracted experience, and of course the gameplay is pretty simple and pretty basic. Find a thing, target it and shoot it. But the environment is highly abstract, and it doesn't spell anything out, and I think people have been engaging it quite a lot. I don't know how good the sales figures are, and that's one thing that our industry is still afraid of giving out. Probably for we sold 5 copies. It's a massive hit. But it's. I think there is room for abstraction in this, and perhaps it's okay. Perhaps it's okay for it not to be mass market, and perhaps we have to find a way for perhaps these will be premium experiences. And I'm not trying to be elitist. I know one is not allowed to be elitist these days, because Nigel Farage, a man of the people, told us all that the elites and experts are evil. But I think it is. I think right now we are still exploring. We're building this tech. We are still. It will sound pretentious, but we are still pioneers in a way, because we're inventing all this crap at the moment. So,
do you know, it's funny you say this though, because I was at an event last night where we were talking about the consumers and where this was all going. And I remember kind of having this moment where we kind of went, hold on a minute, all of us around this table are totally in our bubble. We are totally in the 1%, because we are talking about this industry and people's experiences with this technology as if they should all know. And actually, if you go out on the street and you just said to a bunch of 100 people, hey guys, have you tried VR? Have you put a VR headset on your head? Most of them are just going to turn at you and kind of go, oh, that thing that people are talking about, I have no idea what you're babbling about. And they actually haven't put this technology on their head. And so we're still in that really early stage where actually, for a lot of people, when you put them into a VR experience, they're still going to have that, I like to call it VR face moment, when they kind of do the, ooh, face. You know what I'm talking about, guys? And
yeah.
No idea. Can you explain it again?
But it's that whole, shock and awe moment when they first realize what VR actually is, especially if it's a high-end piece of VR. But for a lot of people, they haven't put, anything on their head yet. They haven't had anything up against their eyeballs, and they don't really understand what VR really means. And so we can get away with it to a certain extent for at least, another couple of years, where people, good percentage of the population really don't know what we're babbling about. And so when we, within our bubble, are talking about how we need to do this, or we need to, increase fidelity, or we need to, improve the frame rate, or whatever the other thing is that we are babbling about, the rest of the population really have no idea what we're talking about. And so it's kind of like that whole thing of the Martian movie where, Matt Damon's on Mars and so he keeps on doing everything. And every time he does something, he's like, I'm the first man on the planet to ever walk up this hill. It's like, well, yes, of course you are, because you're the only man on the planet and nobody's ever, set a foot on this planet before to do this. It's kind of a little bit like that. It's like, you said we're pioneers, and we literally are, because nobody's done it yet, or, people aren't aware that it's been done. And so, for the first time, people do something and they're like, look, I'm there first. And everybody's looking at them kind of going, isn't that awesome? And you're kind of like, but actually, you're just walking up a hill. And so I'm kind of interested to hear from you, Derek, what your thoughts are on this in terms of public perception of what we as technologists and as people within this VR industry are doing.
It's exactly. Listen to Jorg and yourself and Oscar there. It rings so true with the exact situation that we've got. One of the things I find really interesting, and it's a bit of an oxymoron, is that exactly what Jorg was saying was when you get a hardcore gamer, somebody who they have the next generation graphics, they have the HD television, they've got the 4K television, they've got 60 frames a second, surround sound, Dolby, all these things, and they're the ones who really should want this technology, but they're the ones who don't want to adopt it too early because they think it isn't good enough yet. So you have this dissonance where people, they really want it and they really want it to work, but they don't want to go and spend the money and they don't want to put the headset on. And, it made their granny feel sick, so they're not going to do that because it's just, And then you get this sort of, I don't want to cause fights or anything here, but you get the fanboys. You get people who are, they're one or the other. It's like, oh, I like this one because it's got room scale tracking. And I heard that, it's got VSync issues on that one, and this game is only available here. And then we're, as you say as well, we're pioneers, but it's already like, we're going up this mountain, and people are already going in different directions, thinking, okay, well, maybe there's a whale around this side of the mountain, and that's what we want to find. But, I think it's more important that everyone moves together in a general direction. I know that that's not always the most creative way to do things, but if we can nail the technology first and we can bring the prices down and really get into the hands of the users and get the mass adoption, then I think we're laughing, essentially. One of the things that, coming back to, we do a lot of stuff with AR, because obviously AR, you can, with the new Qualcomm systems and systems on chips that are coming in on the S8s and different, handsets like that, it's becoming, with sort of inside-out tracking, it's becoming everyone's got a phone, or 80% of the population has a phone, and those that can afford it. So you've already got this technology hurdle that's already been leapt for that one, and people are quite happy if you say, okay, here's a free experience, try that. They're quite happy to download it, try it, and go, oh, that wasn't for me, or I loved that, I want to see more. But when we're telling people, same thing, you're a hardcore gamer, so we're trying to make hardcore games because that's what we think they should be. whereas the people we should really be targeting are the casual gamers. So back to the era of, as we're saying again, Pong and Tetris. I mean, I remember playing Tetris on a Game Boy years and years ago, and it made no difference to me that it was just black and green. When you think back fondly, you remember it could have been buildings, it could have been spaceships, it could have been anything at all. And it wasn't the graphics that were the important thing, it was the gameplay. And unfortunately, I think in this modern day and age of computer games and even the cliche of a AAA game, nobody really knows what AAA means. It just means really good, But this cliche that because it's AAA and it's got that purest, amazing graphics and look, all the renderosity and it's got, volumetric clouds, that's going to make it a great game. And then the fact that actually it's got terrible gameplay and and it's not interesting. People, I think that's been lost along the way. There's a lot of money being thrown at making it look good, shining it, making it as shiny as possible, and just hoping that the people will bite.
But that's what AAA means. That's what AAA actually means. It's a marketing budget.
Now,
people.
Quality. Now. Calm.
But I can play a game like Horizon Zero Dawn, which is clearly a AAA game, and be absolutely amazed by the craftsmanship, and also and by the production value, and also by a lot of the gameplay and a lot of the ideas and the creativity in it, and at the same time also check out a really quirky, crazy VR experience. Or really cool mobile game. I mean, yesterday, for instance, I picked up a game called Zero Golf, which is on iOS and Android, which is a mad combination between a sort of Super Meat Boy and a golf game with sort of bullet time golf moments. Completely mad. It's wonderful, and it's 2D and it's very simple and sprite based. But so I think there's a room for everything. I mean, I agree, Derek, that we need to expand our audience. But at the same time, I'm not the industry. I'm an individual creator, working with a passionate group of people who want to create something. And where my game won't be for hardcore gamers, and also won't be for novices. It will be somewhere in between, and will be very narratively driven, but also with quite a lot of puzzle gameplay. And with mocap performances and stuff, so we're covering a lot of bases there, but I believe that there is room for everyone. I think that hardcore gamers need to actually get a proper hardcore game and with AAA quality on VR and on PlayStation VR, so they can actually become passionate evangelists of the platform. And I think it's currently missing that. I mean, I believe that there's hope in Farpoint, a first-person shooter coming out on PlayStation VR next month, which also will launch the sort of gun sort of peripheral on the PlayStation. I think that could be really cool. I think also making it more and more of a social experience, which Ubisoft will be doing with Star Trek Bridge Crew, is a really cool idea. But, I think we need all of that. I think we need to make casual experiences, social experiences, free-to-play experiences. I think it is time. We need to experiment right now, and I think it needs to be driven by passionate people who don't think about what the market needs, but what they really, really feel they want and want to play themselves. In my view.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. Yeah, I mean I'm not in any way dissing AAA huge companies or anything like that, because when we make things, we like to make things as sort of as realistic as the budget and the processor will allow for. So I'm not against that at all in any way. Please don't think I'm being elitist. I find it interesting that you also touched on the point earlier about how divisive things can be, and people find themselves in this modern era. And I think with people like to pigeonhole themselves. A lot of people like to be, they like to say, I only play games that are, war games, or I only play games that are racing games, and that's fine, because if that's what they're interested in, that's okay. But some of these people won't recognize other experiences as even being games. They'll say, Candy Crush, that's for aunties and and grannies and and people in hospital. But it's not. It has a value. It has a dexterity, coordination. It might not, and actually it's also got the high end graphical values and things like this as well. But what I'm saying is I'm agreeing with you completely. It's about just making things, and I think some of the bigger studios are shying away from that because of course if a big studio has to put they've got massive budgets, they've got 1,000 people working in their studio, they've really got to invest in this project. This could be a 3-year-long project, and it has to make them money because there's people's houses and swimming pools and gold-clad Porsches on the line here. So they really need to be able to justify their decisions. So they're not going to go out and make a simple little 20-minute experience. They might from a demo point of view, but I think the industry needs more, exactly what you said, it needs more pioneers, more people experimenting and more passionate people saying, you know what, I'm a hardcore gamer, but what about this idea? What about zero-G golf? Things that people wouldn't have thought about necessarily, but they can do it. And I think that's what's great about the new technologies, and Unity especially, without trying to, brown nose here. But I just think it makes these things... Yeah, brown nose. Cool. It just makes these things, anybody can sit down with, a bit of coding knowledge, or even without coding knowledge, you can sit down with Google and GitHub, and within a week you could have something working on a phone. And I think that's really exciting these days. And it's leaps and bounds from there.
I was just going to say, here's the thing though, when we talk about AAA studios or the big studios with these big budgets, I think we have to give this some context to people who are listening who are not from the games industry and therefore don't necessarily understand what we're talking about here, which is that actually, especially for AAA, and I'm going to really focus in on the AAA end of the market here, these budgets that we're talking about, these budgets are 3, if not 4 times the size of a major Hollywood blockbuster movie. They are not small budgets that we're talking about here. And they're not small investments in terms of they're 7 years sometimes in development. Yeah. I've worked on games that were 10 years in development. So, in terms of just what it takes to make a good, high-quality game, this isn't even talking about VR games, which take as much time, if not more in some cases, because you're doing R&D along the way. You're talking about pretty significant investments from people. And I can understand and see why, from a AAA end of the market, people are maybe being a little bit cautious about what kind of risk they're taking. But that doesn't stop people on the indie end of that market from just kind of saying, you know what, I've got an idea, I'm going to spin it up, we're going to throw it out and see what happens.
Yeah, well, I was saying, to take that further, I mean, the thing is, look at the way the games industry, particularly the console industry, was in decline until recently. I mean, it was in decline because it takes an awful lot of commitment. The chances of success for a AAA title are not, instantaneously obvious. The number of, multi-million-dollar failures is probably, as big as risk in film as it is in games in that context, because we're dealing with an entertainment medium. And the problem here is, and I suppose I should put my kind of hard-nosed money guy hat on, but the reality is, got a hype curve, which is basically you get loads of people become aware of a new technology, they get really excited, they overblow their excitement, and then when they first get hold of it, there's a pit of disillusionment. And the pit of disillusionment is actually the point where we start learning, because we learn what happens when the rubber hits the road, where we have to have, like I say, this creative integrity, which the guy's talking about, because we're making Darwinian experiments. What's, I think, very interesting right now is that we now have the context, and I'd like to think from mobile in particular, where we know about evidence-based design. We can look at what people actually do. And what I find incredibly fascinating, particularly about VR, but in general, is things like we actually can know the precise angle of movement of someone's head. And we can record that. And in fact, that stuff's being used in physiotherapy. It's so important. So if you think about this, we can actually look at human behavior. We can look at what people's eyes are in some circumstances. We can look at people's choices. We can look at people's responses. And this is not just limited to VR, of course. This is in general games. But we have a chance in VR to be able to start with that mindset when we go into a new platform. So if we retain integrity, we can actually make something really interesting.
This is the other thing that I'm saying this because I'm really aware that there's a lot of listeners who listen to this show who aren't necessarily purely in the games industry. They're coming at it from a VR industry perspective or an AR industry perspective, and they've come from outside entertainment. So if I seem like I'm kind of explaining things a little bit 101 stylish here, it's because I just want our audience to kind of be on the same page as we go through this. But, one of the things that you kind of raised there very briefly, and I think it bears further scrutiny, is this idea that actually in the games industry, we do understand big data. We understand data, and we understand how to utilize that data to create what we would normally refer to as econometrics within a game. We know how to create addictability and how to push players to do things and move from one stage to the next stage and want to be in one area versus another area, crowd control and footfall within a game environment. We understand these things in a way that actually there are very few other industries that understand these things probably quite as well as we do, to be fair, because that's, from a commercial side of the fence. So I'm not talking about the developer side of the fence necessarily, but certainly from a commercial side of the fence, that's what we pretty much do in our team, is we sit there and we figure out, how can we make this game even more addictive? How can we make people want to spend more time, more money, more effort playing this game? And that kind of knowledge is very, very interesting when you put it into the context of VR, when you get down to even more granular information, as you rightly say, Oscar, even being able to track the angle of a head, and therefore, even if somebody's just doing a little curious tilt of the head, and those personal habits and how you can modify those personal habits and adapt them into a broader scale experience.
Exactly. But I just, obviously, let's try and avoid the use of language that can confuse and scare people, because when we start saying addictive, people are getting a bit wrong idea. There's a lot of behavioral economics we're talking about here, lots of psychology that's going on here, and being able to recognize his personal tics, these habits, are actually about us being able to look at the more powerful and more compelling ways of creating people's interest, and that's by giving them joy, by giving them emotional reactions, by storytelling in ways that are clearly having a reaction. And because we can take all this big data mindset, whether we're making a game or whether we're actually trying to make sure that we've got the right kind of emergency response training, or the right kind of habitual behavior for maybe some sort of training program, though all those things require us to understand that at the end of the day, the person who's putting on the goggles is a person, and we need to respond to them like that.
I personally think it's interesting that, I think we don't even realize, the world doesn't even realize how widely adopted gaming has become in society at large. I think, and Candy Crush in hospitals is one example, but I think, the way political marketers and our politicians and society in general is being gamified day by day has been quite extraordinary to watch. Facebook is a gaming platform. It's literally turning us into peons, very simple ones. It's true.
Yes,
we are being reduced to like 5 smileys. They're not even emotions. They're like, awe, shock and awe, fear, sad, like. That's it. That's who we are. We have been reduced to really shitty, game characters from the early 90s, and we're living our day-to-day lives by that. So and then people expect that VR should act in the same way, where I believe it's actually a rare occasion, an opportunity for us to become physical, empathy-based, organic beings again within a digital world. And that comes with a huge level of complexity. But, my game, for instance, that I'm developing at the moment, we're partially supported by the Wellcome Trust. And I believe also that we're creating a cross-section now between entertainment and science, and in ways that finally makes the stuff relevant again. And for me, gives me a little bit of hope that while, of course, we fall in the trap of separating people potentially and isolating them even further, I think that ultimately with AR and MR, we're going to bring people together again, not as people reduced to binary structures, but ultimately as analog, living, breathing, empathy-driven creatures again. And that's what is exciting to me about it.
Do I find it really interesting, because I've said this a couple of times, and I know I said it at the last session that we spoke on a panel, Oscar. It's this idea that actually there is this move towards more of a unified. I'm gonna call it a unified virtual universe for lack of a better explanation. When we talk about social VR becoming more of the norm and becoming more of this standard that we anticipate, that there will be this environment wherein we all have our digital identity, whether that is a fusion of our social media identity and our digital identity, all kind of mashed up together, and it's thrown into this virtual environment. And I am kind of this opinion that anybody who's played an MMO game before will have a distinct advantage over those who do not understand the idea of digital social groups and how they work and how they operate, which is why people, for example, in Second Life, who've played Second Life before, or played, World of Warcraft or a major MMO.
PlayStation Home, come on, PlayStation Home.
Okay.
I was Home Architect. You could at least mention that.
I was getting there. But, those ideas that actually, as gamers, as people who understand how interaction with digital identities works, there will be a distinct advantage for those people within this virtual environment, whatever it ends up being, this virtual universe.
I kind of agree with you, but I'm going to throw another sort of brick in the machinery there, because I think the reality is that we actually are not very good at dealing with digital environments as human beings in general. I mean, look at the kind of the trolling on Twitter and various other places. Essentially, we know that this is a psychological kind of effect that happens when we're in a virtual world, and it essentially means that we feel anonymous and we stop applying the social norms. So I think the reality is that what happens in those worlds, and I think we noticed it with Home and from the guys who I worked with when I was at Sony who were previously on Second Life, the same sort of phenomenon happened, which is that you form new rules. And these new rules can be Lord of the Flies-like, or they can be socially positive. And it's up to us as a society to enforce those more socially positive norms, and also to make people realise that if you assault somebody in a virtual world, that has a meaningful impact on their personality, and that is similar to you basically attacking them in real life verbally. There's this the reality is that I think we as a society have to understand that we have a new set of conditions in which we can engage. And it's a wider social context question than we appreciate. And we're basically in the teething stage of that. We're in adolescence at best.
We certainly are at the beginning of that stage, but what I would suggest is that perhaps people who come from an MMO background or the games industry have some knowledge to be able to share with the wider VR industry, to be able to say, look, here's a good starting point. Here's what we've seen happen before in these types of environments, and maybe we want to try and encourage these types of social structures. I think there are some basic functions there, but then I don't exactly want to see it become like a toxic
No, but
VR
that's the problem
either.
is that we do, but we also have bad habits.
We do.
And so in some ways, for every positive, and I think to be fair, I do actually think, if you look at some of those communities, particularly just the joyful kind of passionate belief in each other that we saw in PlayStation Home. It was an amazing community, and they will bring their values, and I'm and other communities who are like that will bring their values. The point is that it's up to us to sort of decide what kind of society we want. We kind of get the social connections that we deserve in some ways, but there is something about this idea of, like you say, the separation, the ability to feel separate, and to understand that the way you're perceived in a virtual world is your actions, not just your avatar. I think that's a sort of big trick, which I think for new people that's going to be difficult to get around.
That's why I think your VR headset should actually electrocute your face when you get hurt.
Nice.
But no, but I have you guys read Jaron Lanier's "You Are Not a Gadget"?
No, but I think I need to if it involves electrocuting headsets.
No. He actually came up with the whole term of virtual reality. The Lawnmower Man was actually inspired and based on him as a character. Fantastic guy. He wrote a book called "You Are Not a Gadget," which I encourage every listener to read, but because it really talks to you about the origins of Silicon Valley and how it all came together and how they were actually rebelling against their free loving, throw your keys in a bowl and exchange partners and stuff, hippies in the 60s, parents, let's all sort of rage against Vietnam in the streets, but immediately after the war is over, let's start working for Goldman Sachs. Like when they sort of were all sort of disillusioned by their own parents' hypocrisy, they crawled into these virtual worlds, which of course were quite primitive compared to today. But those were the Steve Jobses and the Bill Gates and also the Jaron Laniers out there. And he was building the first virtual reality headsets back then. And he believes that they made a grave mistake in Silicon Valley by actually making the world binary, by ultimately reducing everything to very simple rules, because it was just easier back then to make a MIDI-based audio system than one that was mimicking the way analog music works in digitally, because it would have required far more processing power and therefore more money. So this is how MIDI became a standard. And the last two generations of kids have been raised on Nokia ringtone, toys instead of, analog sounding toys. And he feels that this has ultimately had a negative impact on society. And it is our duty as creators of digital entertainment or social media platforms, etc., to find a way to actually no longer create things out of convenience and out of, lowest common denominator, low entry level budgetary constraints, but realize that every single design decision actually has a real world impact on society at large. And I think VR needs to now bring people in from out of the gaming industry, from more analog fields, from theater, from film, from experiential stuff, from science, from medicine, etc., in order to build new realities that are far more social and far more educated and far more worldly than the digital stuff so far has been.
Do you know, there's two things I will say to this, because I fully agree with you on this, Jorg. First of all, what I want to say is that actually there are a lot of people who are dabbling at the moment in VR. People who are spinning stuff up and throwing out demos and, just kind of toying around with it and putting together hardware and new types of headsets or new types of haptics or whatever the thing is that they are throwing together and kind of trying to get it out there in the world. And the one thing that I would say to everybody who is dabbling in this industry is, we've said it before in this particular conversation, how we're all pioneers in this industry. But with that comes a certain degree of responsibility. And as you kind of rightly, refer to, is that every decision we make right here, right now, is something that in 5 or even 10 years' time, the rest of the mainstream population who are not in our bubble, who are not at the front of this technology, are going to have to live with our decisions in the next 10 years' time. So when they put this thing on their head for the first time, or this thing into their eyeball, or whatever it is that they end up doing, when it becomes a mainstream thing, they will be living with our decisions. And so we do have a certain degree of responsibility in terms of making sure that we're making the right decisions that they will have to live up to later on down the line.
But we also have a certain degree of irresponsibility, meaning we should be challenging what responsibility looks like. We should be challenging, we shouldn't just be making stuff because it conforms, because it works. We should be making stuff that questions. And
we should be pushing boundaries,
and
absolutely.
Fees up at people,
Yes.
But the other thing I would say as well, which is incredibly important, and Jorg is very right to bring this up, and I was going to get around to it, so thank you for giving me a lovely segue, is this the importance of it not just being about the games industry. Now, I know that we're a little bit biased because we're all from the games industry, but the situation being that it's so important to involve the other industries, especially those industries that don't get asked to be part of the conversation. I know that for me, one of my biggest frustrations is that I will sit at a table with people who want to talk about a project, and they just want to talk to the film industry and the game industry because they don't think that anybody else really knows about this stuff. And the fact is that, immersive theatre, comics, planetariums, the theme park industry, the immersive theatre industry, all of these guys have been doing this for a heck of a lot longer than the film and the game industries have been dabbling with this. They've been telling stories, narrative stories and creative stories for at least 3 decades in these immersive 360 mediums. And the fact that people do not include them in the conversation means that we're missing out on all of this knowledge that already exists. And we keep on trying to reinvent the wheel and say, look, I've invented this new thing in order to be able to tell stories in immersive environments. And you kind of sit there going, but the theatre industry, they've been doing that for 100 years. And it's just this, it's really interesting to me that we don't have enough cross-industry conversation about the existing knowledge that already exists there and sharing that knowledge. And I think it is incredibly important as we go forwards to ensure that this isn't all about entertainment. It isn't all about gaming, because there are so many ways that the technology and the techniques can be applied to other industries, whether that is, defense, automotive, architecture, fashion, arts, medical, whatever the thing may be. All of these industries have something really valuable to both give and take from this industry. So I'd really love to see a lot more cross-industry collaboration happening.
Well, I was actually going to throw a spanner in that works as well.
Go on, Oscar.
I agree with all of that, and except for one thing. There's the one thing that the reason why games, I think, add something very, very special is because in most media, you show, you don't tell. In games, you do, you don't show. And that subtle, stupid little thing makes every bit of difference in this environment, because we don't know where the player is going to choose to look in a theatre. We have to be able to create an experience. We know where the player is looking in a VR experience or an AR experience, and that's the whole point. And we need to be able to understand how to respond to the player activity. And I think you're absolutely right. All the other areas, But the one lesson I think that comes from games, which is particularly unique from games, is this ability to understand why players act.
But I don't necessarily agree with you, actually, because if you take a look at Complicité shows, or if you take a look at a promenade theatre with audience engagement, which, by the way, hasn't just been going on for 100 years, but hundreds of years, and you've had village storytellers and marketplaces in Morocco hundreds of years ago, bringing the audience, like people, onlookers, into their stories and transforming them into other characters in real time and reacting to them, etc. In real time, I'm talking to them as if they were virtual creatures now. It's bizarre, but real world NPCs. But it's I think an actor in such an experience, for instance, does know where the audience is looking and will then react and respond to it accordingly. So and also in VR, I don't think it's possible for us, I mean, at least at this stage, because we're not quite there yet, to literally have the game respond to every single place the player is looking in a game. I think we ultimately, I think we will be quite surprised to see, in my game, for instance, we'll be quite surprised to see where players will decide to look at any given point, and we have to lure them back through certain 3D audio cues and other stuff to actually bring them back into the story, and it's quite a challenge. In the theater, you feel more compelled to do that than in a game. In a game, you feel like, indeed, as you say, Oscar, I mean, you are in charge. So how do you create narrative experience in that will actually bring you back to the golden thread of the story, so to speak, if you indeed have a story at all? So
again, I'm kind of with you. This is the difficulty, because I'm obviously trying to be the devil's advocate in that process, which is it's the autonomy aspect of it which is different. And I understand entirely what you're saying. I mean, I'm a LARPer. I write live action role playing games with 40 people trying to resolve a story by conversation over 4 hours. So I completely get the difficulties in that process. But again, that still retains that kind of art form, that kind of like acting format in some ways, arguably, is still about communicating, responding to individuals' reactions and creating those compulsions or compulsive behaviors. So it's still about acting, about doing, rather than being a recipient of the action. I think all of these techniques you're describing, absolutely for thousands of years, storytelling is incredibly important. But we have finessed some minor aspect which happens to be very pertinent to this virtual and AR world, I suspect.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we're almost edging onto the topic of an entirely new show that we'll do another time. But in the meantime, as always, we like to ask the big questions. And so I want to ask you what it is that you think needs to happen. Be that a cultural shift or a technological shift. What is that big shift that you think needs to happen in order to really kind of just push this industry to the next step? And I am curious to hear from you, Oscar, what you think that thing needs to be.
Yeah, I had an answer earlier on, which was always about the technology and how it needs to be able to be more comfortable, as in not feeling like I'm separating myself from the outside world. And I think that's probably still true, but I'm increasingly coming around to a much more cultural shift. There's something that Pokemon Go did, which is it took an established experience, which we all understood, and delivered it as it was in its own story. So the idea of going around and into the outside world and finding Pokemon and capturing them, putting them into your virtual tool, was exactly the game. And I think we need that kind of moment for us to feel that it's more acceptable to adopt these technologies. Something where the process of the decision to play, the expectation, anticipation of play, includes putting on the goggles, includes putting on whatever the special equipment is. And I think that's the mindset change. How do we get people to consider the whole of the experience, including the setup, as part of the enjoyment?
Okay. And Derek, what about you?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I came from just exactly what Oscar was just saying there. I was thinking about the fact of digital changes before, but I feel that there needs to be a sort of cultural shift in the way that this idea that there's some people that they'll feel stupid if they put a headset on, or they'll feel that maybe you're going to tickle them, or they don't know what's happening because they're in a room and you put this headset on and suddenly they're scared that maybe something will jump out at them. Those who want to do it are already doing it. Those who don't understand it are so scared to even try it in many ways that I think that it's this idea that we really need to, I think personally for myself and for my company, we're focusing more on mixed realities, because you always give the person the option that, they don't have the headset strapped to them. They can look through this magic mirror that everybody has in their pocket, this magic window. So we're trying to come in from we're almost trying to sideload this with, you already have this device, you already press the buttons, you already go to Google Maps, you already, book hotels online, you already know all these things, you already play your computer games. We're just asking you to just, take that little next step just to not, don't feel that you're going to look stupid because you've got your phone there already. But I think that there needs to be a bit of a cultural change. Something, as Oscar said, Pokemon Go was an amazing thing because, it still is, you've got so many people running around parks. And again, they're doing that not to be individualistic. They're doing that because they're meeting friends out in the real world. They're actually going on walks. They're going on hikes. It's really got the sense of community behind it. And I think that sparked the world's imagination, because rather than it just being, you play games, which still has a stigma for some people, it's now the technology is getting there where people are really beginning to understand it and appreciate it. And one of the interesting things I want to actually touch on from the last point was to do with like theatre and things like that. So you've got like the Royal Shakespeare Society, and I think it was the Tempest they're doing at the moment with the digital whale, and that's basically tracking people where they're looking. And I think this is amazing because it's almost taking a technology that maybe many people who would go to the opera or go to a Royal Shakespeare play might consider themselves, I don't want to say snobbish, but they might consider themselves to be beyond. They might think, well, it's a computer game, it's not really for me, it's for the children. But when they see this technology in the world used in such a powerful way, they're going to start really understanding that, it's for everyone. Everyone needs to embrace this. So I think the technology is getting there leaps and bounds. Within a couple of years, I think, with inside-out tracking and system on chip, we're going to be able to just, stick a phone on your face, and we'll have near enough the same technology in 2 years' time that we've got now with current technologies. But I really think it's a cultural thing. People need to a lot of people are dipping their toes at the moment, but people need to just jump in and embrace.
Okay. And you're
going to be cold, but that's fine.
Jörg, what about you? What's your thought on this?
I agree. I mean, I think right now the VR headset is still an alienating device, and it's very similar to, the first personal computers, which were these massive things that would completely dominate whatever room you put them into, and they'd be very loud, and that fans would be whizzing, and your electricity bill would shoot up by 2/3. And it was quite a weird thing, and only the super nerds would have that, and they were traditionally the people who were quite sort of isolated from the outside world around them, and people like, oh, look, he has this big computer and he doesn't go outside in the park and he's a freak. And I think VR still has a bit of that stigma around it, and of course mixed reality and AR is the way to go eventually. And the idea that you can actually look and see another person's eyes, and you can actually see your kids in the room around you when you're engaging in an experience like that will change everything. It will become far less of an alienating experience, and hopefully the next generation of MR, AR headsets will give you the opportunity, the option to actually shut off the blinds completely and then have a VR only experience as well, because there's certain things that you will not be able to do in mixed reality. If you want to really have a director driven experience, if you actually want to have the Spielberg of tomorrow to take you into a fully immersive and closed world where every single item and every element is art directed by a team of great artists, then this is not something you will necessarily be able to do in MR, where suddenly you see your living room and pictures of your granny around you and stuff. But I think right now what we need to be doing, in my view, is to make the best and the most passionate and beautiful work we can with what we've got. I personally don't want to worry about the state of the industry and how many devices are out there and stuff. This is not my job. This is Samsung and Oculus and HTC's etc. job. This is their worry. Right now we have a rare opportunity as creatives, as thinkers, and as storytellers to really enter uncharted territories and truly be creative, because in all other creative industries the rules have been set. In the film industry, unless you are Disney, Marvel, Star Wars, etc., or you're doing something on a big existing brand, you can't even dream big anymore in cinema because you are considered too risky. Whereas in VR, it is all risky. So you have people who are willing to spend what I call silly money on actually experimenting and coming up with something really cool that no one's ever done before. And it's this stuff we need to think about. I don't worry about the market. The market will change as it will. But I think right now is our time to be unbound by limitations, unbound by any rules, and to just dream big, really.
Okay. So I'm going to throw a curveball on everything that we've talked about and just kind of throw in there that I still think that we should take more of a look at business-to-business application of VR for the next couple of years, because I don't think that it's all about consumer headsets, and I don't think that the consumers are ready yet. And I think that we do need to be encouraging and supporting more of these kind of more public spaces, more corporate applications of the technology as things move forward. But that's just me throwing in my 10 cents worth at the very
You're absolutely right, though. You're absolutely right. They need game brains to make their experiences work better. But we need their money for us to be able to do the creative stuff, to experiment, to learn the things that they need to put in their business experiences.
It's a beneficial relationship for everybody. So, as always, we like to give our listeners a way to be able to find out a little bit more about what you're up to. We ask you to do that by sharing with us your social media handle of choice. What would that be, Derek?
For me, I think it probably makes sense to give my birth certificate, my driver's license, and my shoe size. I'm going to give you my Twitter handle, which is Duality. So that's DEUXALITY. The X's are cool.
And what about your good self, York?
It's NEW, like new, and JORG. So New York. NEWJORG, and that's on Twitter.
Thank you. And Oscar?
Still on my crazy role-playing game character name, which is at Athanasius, which is ATHANATEUS.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for listening. If you enjoy this content, don't forget to subscribe and review, and follow us on Twitter at Digital Jam Ltd. Thinking of launching your own podcast? Speak to the GL Pro UK team, who handle all of our podcast service needs. Tell them that Digital Jam Sessions sent you, and you'll get 10% off your first order. Find out more at www.glpro.co.uk. DigitalJamSessions.com